because otherwise we run out of time and we have a nice lineup of speakers. Good morning, everyone. Adnan?
Good morning, everyone. And Chandana has asked me to give the opening remarks today. So some of you heard me earlier. Probably I'll be saying the same thing again, but in a slightly different manner. Um, I hope you are arriving today with a little rest and perhaps still carrying some of yesterday's conversation with you. Day one made it very clear that translation is never just a technical exercise. It is shaped by history, power, memory, and choice. Again and again, we heard that translation involves negotiation, sometimes even discomfort, and that not everything travels smoothly or should. From the discussions on the Northeast to those on Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and various dialects, what stood out was a shared recognition that translation is not secondary to literary culture. It is central to how literary worlds are made, contested, and renewed. Day two shifts the lens slightly. Today we are thinking not only about translation as an act, but about what happens later. Uh, how translated texts are circulated, who enables that circulation, and under what conditions. Beginning with publishers speak is important precisely because publishing is often invisible in these conversations, even though it is where some of the most consequential decisions are made about language, genre, risk, visibility, and recognition. Today's sessions also bring genre and region into sharper focus. Dalit writing, poetry, later Bengali, Oriya, Marathi, Gujarati, and South Indian languages. These discussions remind us that translation works differently across traditions. It can amplify voices, but it can also flatten them if we are not attentive. The challenge is not smooth difference, but to stay with its complexity. As we move through the day and eventually towards the concluding dialogue this afternoon, I hope we continue to ask what kind of literary future are translation and publishing practices making possible? Who gets to be heard and on what terms? Thank you once again for being here. Over to Sucharita.
Welcome, everyone. I repeat, thank you for being here on a Sunday morning, 9:15. I think we should truly be grateful. It means a lot. Um, we're going to continue from our very enriching sessions that we had yesterday, and we take the program further, starting with PublisherSpeak, where we put a spotlight on publishers, their decision making, their challenges, etc. And this, the second part, we are going to look at translation across genres. So there we're going to look at specific genres and what are the challenges that are faced over here. Now, to my mind, and I think some of what I've been thinking was validated yesterday by the authors and translators. Publishing is a combination of creativity and hard-nosed business decisions. And the two, as many of us are aware, may not necessarily go hand in hand in the sense that brilliant, creative, diverse, truly original and stimulating works may have difficulty finding a market. We heard from several of our participants yesterday, all of whom are distinguished authors, translators, publishers, that the translations available in the market pretty much cater to, pop spirituality, self-help books, etc., often of very poor quality. Now, we are here today to consider the ways in which India's literary heritage in multiple languages is being kept alive, only to encounter the sad reality that buyers have different preferences. Now, this is a pity because niche markets are, I would reckon, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, an unsustainable business model. Uh, does it make sense to pour in this amount of hard work, creativity, and money into a product that may eventually find no takers? Uh, it is, I do believe, though, that wonderful testament to the passion, talent, resilience of our authors and translators that despite such a pessimistic market signal, they continue with their work for the love of the work. And this might be the only time when I actually bat for supply side economics, which is something, otherwise I completely abhor and do not support at all. So when economics throws a spanner in the work, what happens to creativity? How do decisions get made about whether and what to translate? Who should do the translation? Should the author in translation already be on the firmament of the literary star system, a pre-existing brand, or is there room for new talent, and how does that get encouraged and made? What goes into editorial production, sales, marketing, and publicity processes of literature and translations? These are some of my thoughts, but I'm certain that our panelists will be able to shed light on these and many other issues. So I am going to hand over the floor to our guest today. It is, of course, I must let everyone know that three of our panelists, for various reasons, have not been able to join. That's really sad. On the other hand, that means that our guests today get a little more time to speak, comfortably. Let us know. So we have with us Chandana Dutta, Mr. Dinesh Sinha, and Ms. Karthika. So I'd like to now request Chandana to please take over the floor and hold forth whatever you'd wish to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sucharita, to Chandra, and to the TBR team. It's wonderful to be here. We had a very long day yesterday, but I think every minute of it was something that one
Chandana,
thought.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but I just realized I haven't introduced you.
Oh,
There may be
so-
people who don't know you. Can I do that?
First.
Okay, I'm really sorry about this. Now, Chandana is author, editor, and translator. She holds a PhD from JNU. She's been an assistant director for Katha Vilasam, the publishing wing of Katha, an organization that pioneered translations in India. She set up the publishing outfit India Log, of which she was the chief editor. She was the editor Indian Horizons, a quarterly journal on art and culture published by the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, New Delhi. She has been adjunct faculty for the master's program in publishing at Ambedkar University. She translates from Hindi and Bangla into English. Author of several books, she is also series co-editor of the Writer in Context series being published by Routledge UK. Her latest publication include a book on the iconic Tamil poet Salma and a translation from Bangla, The Mapmaker. Thank you so much, and I will not interrupt you now.
Thank you for that, Sucharita. That was, anyway, to get back, I'm going to dip into a lot that we spoke of yesterday, because no matter how much we talk of translations, there's always something more to be said, because many of us who've been working with translations, really, it's a hands-on job all the time. So it's not something that you can step back and, work on. And the processes are such that we have to actually get into, not just the text, what it means, but also how it should be produced, because gradually over the years, and I'll come back to it again, my own career in publishing has, I feel, come a full circle back today, because I started with Katha, which I really believe put translations center stage in India. Katha at that point of time was, even now perhaps, was the only publishing house that was focusing only on translations. There was nothing else happening in Katha at that time, and it was very important. Very fortunate that I joined, and there were so many of us, and with Geeta there at the helm of it, translations actually became something that we were living day in and day out. And it was not only the fact that we were working with the various languages that we could, there was a process of how we should be looking at translation, how it should be done. It was not simply that you pick up a book and you translate it from whatever given language it is into English. Unfortunately, we all I translate into English. I don't have the confidence to do it the other way. I can't do from English to Bangla or to Hindi as well as I can do from Bangla and Hindi to English. But that apart, the way we went about looking at translations and looking at the publication or publishing of translations as an entire process, there was nothing piecemeal about it. And along the way, of course, my own publishing career took me elsewhere. But I have now come back, and I find myself fortunately at a very happy space where although I'm on my own, I'm not associated with any particular publishing house, I have the space, the mind space, to actually be continually thinking of what should we translate, uh, how should we bring it out. Of course, again, completely dependent on the good offices of friends like Karthika and other publishing houses, that they should accept these translations. I mean, I might think that this is a book that must be done, but unless I have somebody who is able to take it and publish it, that work is possibly not going to do what it set out to do. But again, there have been books that I worked on recently. The Salma book, very important book to my mind. Um, it did not make the kind, I'm picking up words from yesterday's conversations, it did not make the kind of buzz that it should have. But to me, it's important that the book exists. If somebody wants to take the book, have a look at it, and lead on from there, I think that is what many of us who are working in translation are doing. Maybe there's a buzz, maybe there's no buzz, but the fact is that we cannot do without translations. Now, some of the things that we did at Katha, and again today I see how important it is. We had yesterday some sessions where examples were given of how translations can go wrong, and I think we'll all remember Abdul Bismillah ji's conversation, where he actually brought out these very funny examples of translations can go wrong. It was entertaining, but it's also cautionary, because we need to remember that if the work goes out and it might just get accepted the way it is, but the fact that there's been a major deviation from the meaning that has not come through, I think somewhere down the line, it'll go and hurt, the intent of the writer, the book that has come out. So we have to remember that editing is a major part of publishing of translations. And I say this with the full knowledge that publishing houses who are trade publishers, it's really, publishing is passion, but it's certainly economics. We can't ignore that. For somebody who's sitting as, the CEO or, the head of a publishing house, which is in trade publishing, the market is extremely important. You can't ignore the market unless what you feed into the market comes back to you either doubly or triply or whatever it is. For a publisher, it is very difficult to continue to function. As an individual, I can be very, happy about doing the books I want to do, but ultimately somebody else is responsibly taking that on. And unless the economics, the finances, the cost of it works out in every which way, that book is not going to be taken. Again, I'm going to bring some, because we're also talking of the challenges that we face as publishers. Over time, I've begun to look at translation primarily as research. And by that I mean that of course we pick out books or we pick up books to translate, which we are absolutely taken in by. I won't want to translate a book I don't like, true. But whatever it is that I translate or whatever it is that I pitch to be published must somewhere add to the research and the documentation that is ongoing today, because that is what we are actually sitting on, a gold mine, if we think of it that way. We have so many languages, so much being created in the languages. We don't really, even those of us who are working 24/7 in translations, I don't think we know the extent of what we can actually bring out and translate. So for that, a certain infrastructure needs to be created, and there this whole thing of, you know, what is it, how do we edit a translation, how do we depend, and we must, on resource people who know the language. I might know the language, but there would be somebody who can help me read the language better in order to bring that translation better into the space that I'm looking for it. So, when we look at it like this, what is the context of the translation? Because if we want to make space for translations, we need to first ourselves know what the context of that work is. One of a novel that I have, let's say, translated and published, or a poem that we publish, it's great because those are also adding to the brickwork. But I notice, I'll bring this up in several of the problems that I think I have seen in the last couple of years at least. Those are the things that I would request others who are in translation to pay attention to, because that is what will add to the kind of archive that we are creating for translated works. It's not only enough that we translate and leave it there. There'll be somebody else who will pick up from that and move on and want to, you know, translate further. How do we do that? Very recently, a volume has been published under a program which is institutionally supporting translations. And there, the writer is alive, the writer is co-translator. But it's a collection of short stories. I was trying to look at it for purposes of review, and I wanted to know if I could find the originals. So I could at least read the originals and see how the translations have been done, but not one story mentions the original name of, you know, the story. You know, it's there in English, but I don't know what the original name is. There are no publication details of where was it first published in that language. Yeah. It doesn't say anything about the magazine or platform where it was published. Now, it is all right, you know, we can ignore these little things. But the thing is that if I am looking at it, even for, let's say, just the basic purpose of review, I have none of these details with me. It's very difficult in the case of certain writers to find those details also. I've asked around friends who teach that language. So far, I haven't managed to get those stories together so that I can read them and then read the English translation. So why do we, you know, if it is possible, and it is possible, in many cases it is possible, unless of course the writer was published much earlier, maybe in the 1900s or something, and then maybe you won't be able to find some of these details, but this is somebody writing in the, you know, in the last few years. Why are we missing out on those things? It's a major concern for me, because it's not going to take us very much time to put it there. It just requires a kind of, you know, like we have to grow into this space where we will have to tell ourselves these are important details to look for. It may not contribute anything more than that, but it is important. I'll bring up some issues that I've faced, because in the last few years we've worked a lot with different bhashas. Bringing out books from several different languages, bringing out volumes that contextualize writers, that bring in their original works, works by peers, criticism, contemporary criticism, you know, and it has exposed us to many different aspects of what happens when somebody wants to look at translation as a part of the research or the documentation that they are creating. I'll bring up these problems because I'm sure all of us as publishers would have faced this. It's also something that we may need to remember as people in publishing, in translation, also for young translators. When you are looking at these things, perhaps these are some of the little points that we can keep in mind. So I mentioned the details. Now, supposing along with that, we were just to, if it's a collection of short stories or nonfiction pieces by a single author, maybe we could look at some bibliographies. I'm sure the publishers will not mind adding one more page or maybe 2 pages to their books. It is cost, but where the publisher feels that's contributing something to the market that they are creating and they are feeding into every day, I am sure it will be very welcome. Gradually, it will add to many such bibliographies and details which teachers could use, which students can use. So bibliographies, we just ignore it in India, at least I feel. And then when we go to work with, let's say I was working with this writer, Joginder Paul, it became like, a burden sometimes to find those things. Luckily, there are archives in places like Jamia and other universities, so you can go back. Sometimes you have access directly to the writer's estate. But if, when this work has happened, if I am already putting that in, for the next person, it becomes that much easier to take it forward and do more work on that writer. And gradually, that is how we create space for writers, writings, languages. The other problem, which, one of the things we were speaking yesterday of was canon building. And there's always a politics to that. What choice do we make? Who are we publishing? Why are we publishing X and not Y? It's fraught with problems of decision making. It'll always be political, because when I make a choice, it's obviously a personal choice, a choice dictated by what I have read or what I feel. But my choice is really between making a choice, which could be whatever choice it is, or not making a choice, which I don't see as a choice anymore. We need to make choices. So when we, so in collections or anthologies, two real problems I am going to state here, and it's not therefore the choice of X writer only dictated by our own desire to choose a writer. In the case of one language, the writer said yes to giving their works for this particular collection, and it was a discussion over a couple of months. The story was chosen with the help of a language expert. We had given the story out for translation. When this happened, at that point, I sent them a letter of contract. It was simply a letter of permission, that such and such, I'm giving permission for the publication. It's just that the language is such of that letter provided to us by a publishing house that the writer went into a mode of panic and she refused to accept calls. I could not reach her on WhatsApp or email. Whereas, we were looking at stories by the husband and the wife. The husband had given permission, his story was translated already. But why was this person not willing to give us permission at that point? Because she felt she could not understand the language of that letter of permission, which was pretty simple, but there are words and clauses which are legally dictated. Not very difficult to understand, but it induces sometimes worry in certain writers, especially, and maybe this is something we ignore because we are sitting here in Delhi looking at an English language publishing scenario. We feel more or less comfortable. This is the kind of letter we send out regularly. And back and forth, she talked to her daughter, who's a lawyer and trained to be a lawyer. She talked to two of her lawyer friends. I kept telling her that your husband is okay with this. He's already, and yours is almost translated, but no way that this person would accept. So we had to pull back. The two stories were not taken. That forced us to take other stories. Now, this decision of who to include in the volume then did not completely rest on me as an editor, for example. So, there are many of these factors, and my thing would be to people, to publishers who are drawing up contracts, is perhaps we could relook at that language to make it convenient for people outside of where we are sitting. This is literally, in a sense, sometimes the center of power for English language publishing. But maybe we need to step back and make it even easier for them. In another case, in another language, oh, have I run out of time? Oh, okay. I'll continue later. You can, please.
I mean, you could complete your sentence though if you.
Okay. So, in another language, again, we were not given permission after a long discussion because the expectation was that this is being published in English, and so there should be a lot of money at the end of it. And so the estate wanted to be compensated very well, and rightly so. But we didn't have the money because we were doing all of this gratis ourselves. So, economics for the publisher is important, but we need to also, as publishers or people in publishing, people who are trying to create these books, we need to work out a system where translators or writers' estates are also compensated properly for it. We have tried, but it hasn't worked out. There are several other things, but maybe we'll come back to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chandana ma'am. May I please now call upon Mr. Dinesh Sinha. Now, Mr. Sinha is a publishing person who has worked with Macmillan India Limited and Oxford University Press before starting Byword Consultancy and later Byword Books Private Limited. At present, he is in charge of Ratna Books. Now, this imprint of Ratna Sagar publishes English translations of celebrated literary texts from Indian languages. Sir, over to you, about 10 to 12 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Chandra ji, for inviting me for this seminar to speak on challenges and problems of publishing translations. I have I have worked. I have done some editorial work for international agencies like WHO and UNICEF, and they discourage the term problems, and so I limit myself to challenges because a challenge presents an opportunity which can give solutions and beyond. So I think we started, in fact, Dr. Jain, who was owner of Ratna Sagar Private Limited, a very leading publishing house for educational publishing, school books and all. So in 2015, sometime middle of 2015 or later, he asked me whether I would be willing to take on this project independently of publishing translations. And Dr. Jain himself was teacher of linguistics and very erudite scholar, written path-breaking books in linguistics, Indo-Aryan languages. And I mean, we used to discuss about literature several times in the evening when sitting there with him. So he asked me whether I would be interested in taking on this responsibility. I said yes, because my earlier experience in Oxford University Press and Macmillan was in other discipline. I was a medical editor and publisher. So he also invited my colleague Sridhar Balan, and we started this program. Initially, we met Ashok Vajpayee, A.R. Venkatachalapati, and interacted with Geeta Ramaswamy to know what is the scene of publishing like. In those days, there were translations, but they were, HarperCollins, Penguin, and other Hachette, they were doing translations beyond, along with other publishing, not specifically. And we focused on translation. So for about 5-6 months, we were doing this groundwork and trying to get our ideas fixed. And we realized that we should focus on translators to start or to kick off this program, which means that we will give equal importance to translator as a creative person as we would give to author. That means also give them similar terms, offer them equal royalty, equal terms, give them copyright permission also. I mean, they will retain, the translator will retain the copyright for the translation. And we started looking around for people and people who were interested, looking around for translators and what the term she used, that translators who were, obsessed with something, and she used the term, this must be done. So we were able to find, for the first 3 translations, Kirti Ramachandra, who did Gangadhar Gadgil for us. Then Prema Jayakumar, who did the 6th finger from Malayalam, Gangadhar Gadgil from Marathi, and there was one book that was offered to us by Venkatachalapati on After Yesterday by Appadurai Muthulingam. With 3 translations we launched in November 2017, so we are about 8 years now. We have 46 already published books, out of which 11 books have been either have won some award or longlisted or shortlisted for various awards, including the JCB award. One book was longlisted. Now, there was what we offered them as initially we offered them a sum equivalent to the sale of 1,000 copies as advance, split equally between author and translator in 2 installments. Initially it was at the signing, half the amount at signing and half of the amount as soon as the book was published. But when COVID came, 2 years were very difficult, and the second installment is now being given 1 year after the publication. Otherwise all terms are the same. There was, initially the challenge was to tell people that whether we will be able to sustain and whether we are serious. Initially, from publishing experience, I realized that all authors and translators want 3 or 4 things. They want that the publisher is serious, the book will be published in time, the book will be adequately edited, it will be well produced, and it will be well marketed. So while we were able to assure them on the first 3 aspects, we said we will try our best to market them as well, which, as you know, all kind of literature, poetry, even translations are not very easy to market because there are several challenges there. So telling them that we will be able to do these 3 things were not difficult. Those challenges we were able to meet. Then the manuscript started coming, and the challenge there was to tell them that yes, we will edit them. And as she said, that she used some term for this, editing is a very serious business. We also think like that. And after the first round was edited, then a series of negotiations started, which was less in terms while we were signing the contract, but more when we were sending them edited versions, because they were so thoroughly edited that the negotiations, unlike those of the trade deals, because we assured them that no ego is involved. We are not commenting on what you have done. We are trying to find a seamless, smooth reading in English. So please accept that and view it in that terms. What if you have any problem, please go back to the original and comment. If you are unable to take our edits, please let us know and we will move forward. So there have been all these kinds of to and fro's, second or third round of editing, but we have been able to overcome them, no problem. In these 46 books that we have done, we have covered 9 languages, including one from Prakrit, which Dr. Sudhamai mentioned yesterday on Vasudev Hindi. Most of the books, 20, have come from Tamil, and we were able to increase that number because we had support from Tamil Nadu government on TNTB program. And the 10 books that we have done with them, 5 were our initiatives that we had already signed the agreement. We had selected the book and they came on board. 5 books they offered to us whether we would like to collaborate with them for publishing. So this is how we have come so far. I would say all challenges we were able to meet successfully, and these are part of the thing. The last challenge, that is marketing, we still were struggling very hard, and everyone expected that even if the book was shortlisted, longlisted for an award, it was not selling. And there were reviews, and still the book was not selling. Good reviews, and the book was not selling. So it's not selling in the numbers that they expected us, the book, to sell. So recently we have collaborated with HarperCollins, where they will do the paperback editions of all our books, and we will do only, since we were doing only the hardcover anyway, except those books we have done in collaboration with TNTV. So we hope that we will be able to answer some of those challenges when the first 6 books of that clutch has come out recently. This is what we have done so far, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in this regard. But I'll have 3 observations of what was discussed yesterday. One is, many examples were given of funny translations, which only goes on to show that humans have been using artificial intelligence for a long time. So, if you do anything mechanically, the result will be the same, and why blame AI now? So the second observation was that people used power language. Power language, I can understand the use of the term when a language has political backing or political support or political patronage. But I think the examples that were given, that English is not able to successfully carry the sensitivities of Indian languages, I think Indian languages are more powerful, and we are enriching English by doing the translation. So they should be, and in that sense, all Indian languages are more, they are richer and powerful. The third observation is there was, use of terms like, I'm sure those terms were used for publishers, like silencing, subversive, asymmetry. So I think these are strong terms, and they should be used with care, with due diligence, because otherwise, and in the absence of solid examples, these merely sound like theoretical acrobatics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sinha. I think that was amazing. so much to think about over there from what you've said. And now I'd like to invite Karthika to speak about her experiences. Karthika is a prominent figure in Indian publishing. She is serving as a publisher at Westland Books, which is an Amazon company. No? Is it?
I think your bio may be.
Maybe old or dragged from. Okay, fine. Redact that. She's a publisher. She has a long and distinguished career, having previously held position of publisher and chief editor at HarperCollins. Karthika began her career at Penguin in 1996 and is known for publishing prominent literary and popular writers in India, including several award-winning authors. She has been instrumental in setting up the Context imprint at Westland, which focuses on literature and politics. And so, with that apology, over to you, Karthika.
Fine. I don't know quite where to begin because I feel like I have so much to say about the subject of translation. But perhaps a bit of a chronology that I discovered for myself, just to talk about how, as editors, we have seen translation change in the publishing world in India. When I first started out at Penguin, and this was late 90s, I remember one of the first titles that Penguin published as part of its initial publishing bouquet in the 90s was Rag Darbari by Srilal Shukla. And I remember that then, when the book was published, I wasn't there at that point, but a little later, Gillian Wright was a translator. And this book has been, celebrated for decades and continues to be a modern classic for Penguin. I happened to look it up recently just to confirm something, and I realized that even today, Jilly's name is not on the cover. It still only says Rag Darbari, Srilal Shukla. Now, that was not something that would have bothered us in those days when translations were being published at that stage. It was almost taken for granted that the translator was going to be hidden. And always people would say things like, when you read Marquez, did you know it was a translation? Did you look at who the translator's name was on the cover? The whole point is you just want to read it and enjoy it, and it helps to not point out the fact that it's a translation. This theory held good for a while. Then we started to see the translator's name appearing on the back cover of the book. So there would be the blurb, or right on top there would be translated by, or at the bottom there would be translated by. Some of this was because translators themselves said, where am I? Partly, I think this happened because prominent people started to translate. So when a well-known person put their name to it, marketing felt that it was also going to add to the saleability of the book. So why not put their name on the back cover? So it went from there to the back cover. It would always be on the credit, on the title page, but there was no copyright assignment as far as I remember. It was the author's copyright. And then now, of course, we realize that we never would do any of this. I think it's across the board that we would obviously split royalties with the translator, have separate contracts with the author and the translator, where the translator has clear ownership of their translation. It can't be assigned to someone else. And at the same time, they get front cover prominence. Their name matters. And now it's come to a point where the translator, in particularly good translators, have built such a reputation with their readers that if their name appears, it actually helps the book's visibility and reviewing and any conversation that happens around it. So there's been that shift in how to treat the translator, which I think is very interesting, but also it foregrounds the process much more than it used to do. It goes not just packaging, but also now as publishers, we've also often thought about where do you locate a translation in a list? Like you said, Ratna Books was focusing on translation only. So I remember at Penguin when books were published, they were published alongside other fiction or non-fiction. And most translation, even now, actually continues to be fiction. Not so much non-fiction. I think the percentages are very, very skewed in that respect. So there would be the books that were published from, say, Malayalam or Bengali, which were the two prominent translation languages for a very long time. Marathi came in, I think, much later, and you'll see even now much less of, say, Gujarati or Kannada a little bit. Kashmiri, you'll see only very few titles. You'll see now we had this whole conversation on Northeast translations, and that I think has increased in the last few years. But in the old days, probably because of the translator's own interest, it was mostly Bangla and Malayalam that we got to see a lot of. And there again, I think a lot of what I saw was centered on the translator. One of the first books I worked on was O.V. Vijayan's Saga of Puram. And there, O.V. was a writer and the translator. So it was a process by which you sat with him, and he would want to go through every sentence, every line, and then he would be like, I was thinking of this when I wrote this in Malayalam, and now in English, I think we should make it this because it's not reading very well. And because he wrote in English and Malayalam, you had a different caliber of writer, translator, and there was one of the earliest edit jobs I did, so I was just learning on the job. But I remember how clearly articulated his thinking was that the reader in English should be able to relate to this book. At the same time, he was so loath to lose the nuance of the Malayalam. So it was a constant tightrope walk, how to keep this and that together. So that was one part. Then later, I remember editing Paul Zakaria, and he is another wonderful Malayalam writer. He had the same issue of, as being a writer who writes in both languages and knows the nuances of both, he went about rewriting. He would say, this story, I don't think we should do it. This shouldn't work like this in English. I need to slash paragraphs. I need to change something because it doesn't ring true in English. And so he made it an author's translation again. Though A.J. Thomas had translated the work, he went about rewriting parts of it to make it this. And then we had translations by, say, recently we had this book by M. Mukundan, which won the JCB Prize. It's called Delhi, and it's a most marvelous novel about Delhi and the Malayali community in Delhi. In that, there were two translators, Fatima and Nandakumar. So there was another collaborative process. The writer said, "You all do what you like. I don't want to get into this." So the two translators collaborated. One would do one part, another, then they would read each other's. And then it came to me, and then I worked on it. And while working on it is that perennial question of, do you edit translations differently from the way you edit a novel in, say, English, per se, original English? And it's also a difficult thing because what are you trying to retain here? Is there such an important aspect of the translation and the sense of the original that you have to carry through? That is it that you're being lazy about the choice and the struggle to get that English to say what you want to say in Malayalam? Is it just that we're giving up too soon? Is there not a possibility of pushing that English language to do more than it normally does, to find the way in which you want the Malayalam to come through, but you're sure that the reader in English is going to read it as though it's fresh English content? I think it's not an easy answer, and I think it's a constant battle between the two languages. But I'm constantly on the side of the reader and not necessarily the source language or the source text. I feel that if you are going to move it into another language, it needs to work to the spirit of the second language as well, and not just the letter of it. So that kind of translation, and I have this personal experience of someone like a Tejashwini Niranjana, who's a fantastic translator from Kannada to English. She's also an academic and an amazing theorist of language and literature. So when Teju first did her translation of Vaidehi's stories, it's called Gulabi Tokis and Other Stories, she was very much in the academic mold and academic theory and literary theory, and she wanted the stories and the translation to be there needed to be a layer for her where the reader could perceive the translation and the process of translation. Then a couple of years ago when we published Mithun number 2, which is her translation of Jayant Kaikani's Kannada stories, she came to it a decade later with a slightly different sense, and she said, I want the English reader to get the power of Jayant's writing, but the focus had shifted to impact. So how a reader in Kannada would receive a text or a language, or a sentence, a paragraph, uh, that is what we want the English reader to receive from the English text. The response is what you're looking for. How should the reader feel about this, and how should the reader respond to something is the point. It's not about showing the process or getting transparency into that process. If I can get the same joy out of reading that English book and get what Jayant intended, then that's the victory of the translation. So that whole process has shifted while the focus remains on translator and translation. I think very different people and very different processes have been involved in creating the end result. So, I mean, do I have like a minute more? A minute. Okay, I just want to say one last thing. As publishing, in terms of the packaging also, which is not a word that outside publishing makes like very good sense, but we do package a book, right? You have a cover on it, you have a blurb written on it, you have an image for it, and that too has seen so much over the past. In the beginning, I remember a Malayalam book, for instance, would often have an aesthetics which was rather similar to the Malayalam cover. For instance, there was a lot of paintings were often used for the cover, or art by Malayali artists would be on the cover. And now it's all about how do we make this look as international or as like any other novel. There's a shift in the way cover designs have come about, but it's also about how do you talk about the novel or the book? Do you talk about it as translation? Do you create an imprint that does only translations? And so do you keep your focus on the idea of translation over and above the idea of the novel or whatever else that work is trying to do? Again, I don't think we've come up with, like, we keep vacillating. Sometimes we do this and sometimes we do this. Some publishers choose this route, some publishers choose another route. But at the end of the day, what has become very clear to us is that translation is a very integral part of any publishing that happens even in the English language now across India, across publishers. And it is not treated anymore as a tokenism of we have to do at least so many titles a year in translation, or we have to do one from this language, one from that language. I think those have retreated to the background, and it is about a commitment to doing the work that we really believe in. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And we have been looking for things like sponsorships and funds to create specific lists like classics, which may not be as saleable as, say, something contemporary. But I think almost all publishers are agreed that this is an ongoing project, and in some ways we collaborate to make it bigger and more attractive for the readers, as kind of building on each other's work. There's plenty more I want to say, but I'll shut up.
Thank you so much. Huge thanks to all our speakers. I think, the questions that I started out by asking in the beginning and received so many interesting answers to that. And one thing is very clear that, the production, the editing, the selection and the marketing processes don't seem to be very distinct processes. They seem to be deeply intertwined, and the business is clearly as important as the creatives. We have about 5 to 7 minutes where we can open the floor up to questions and comments. So yeah, please just, you first, sir, and then you, ma'am. Yeah, okay. Yes, please introduce yourself.
My name is Amol, and I'm an independent kind of historian. And so my were just a couple, just two minor questions. One, Dinesh Sinha ji pointed out about this thing. So about books and about translations and about. So I was just wondering. There was this book. There is this book that has come out. There is this book, a classic book by Richard Eaton, Islam in the Bengal, Rise of Islam in the Bengal Frontier, that is being now translated into Hindi by Primus. There is this issue that whose translation one should accept. If there are two scholars who have worked on this, who are from medieval background and who have read the book, but the translations are completely different. So is it the status of the scholar that counts, or is it the more to do with the actual translation? when you are writing, when you are translating a book from English to Hindi, not from Hindi to English, but from English to Hindi, where you have scholars who have, like, there are terms where people differ and they have different kind of ways of writing it. So whose translation do the publishers accept? Especially for a book like Rise of Bengal and Rise of Islam in Bengal Frontier. And the second this thing was basically to do with the fact that how um, we have been talking about translations and all, but from English to Hindi, the acceptability of translations in the sense at the college level and at the school level, especially to do with there's a publishing house like Granth Shilpi that translates books of classic works by Marx, by Romila Thapar, by Irfan Habib, you name it, and they have translated it. For students who are from Hindi background and they are more comfortable in, I'm talking about my own department, history department, for them Granth Shilpi is the go-to publisher when it comes to reading books on Hindi. So is it history books in Hindi language? So I was just wondering whether the translation itself has different kinds of levels, in the sense that there is one translation which is a quite a literal and meant for people who are, in the sense, more uh, rooted in that areas, like senior scholars and all. But then there is also a translation that is meant for students, that is meant for college students, not even school students, who are just looking for some material in Hindi so that they can read it and understand what are these things. So I was just wondering about that whether these two kinds of clarifications or observations. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take the second question and then open up the floor, or how would you like to answer, respond? Okay.
For two reasons, I'll be very guarded in my reply to this question. Firstly, that Primus is a sister imprint, so I would not like to comment on what they do. Secondly, we publish from Indian languages into English, so I am less qualified to answer for the other way around. But, and however, in generic terms, just to respond to your query, a book is translated because people feel very strongly that this material or this research or this whatever discourse needs to be presented in another language. At what level is to be decided by the market, whether it's meant for students, so it will be watered down and abridged or whatever. I hope I have answered somewhat your question. Thank you.
Ma'am, please.
Hello. My question is to Ms. Karthika. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. My name is Bharati. So this is partly as a writer. I'm not a translator myself, but because one thinks in in Indian context. And you were talking about how the English reader, the translated languages reader, let us say, should be kept in mind. And at some level, I do realize that. But what do you do when you think in Indian terms, and I'm not saying in Indian language so much, but in Indian terms, and you think of describing a beautiful woman as Chandramukhi? What would you do? Moon-faced in English is exactly the opposite of anything beautiful at all, right? So these are things, not just that, but if I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking in terms of beauty. In Sanskrit literature, for example, a woman's nose might be compared to a creeper or a vine. That makes no sense in English, except if you're doing, traditional translations. And since I'm a historian of early India and I read a lot of stuff which is, early Indian, when I think about, as a writer, when I think about today's terms, many of my similes come from my older reading. But it makes no sense. A Grecian nose makes much more sense when I'm describing somebody in English. I write in English. So what would you do if you were translating something? Well, I would be editing that translation, asking much the same questions that you are asking. But I do think that we need to I think I said this before, that I think we need to do more with the English language if we are talking about translation. Obviously, Chandramukhi from one Indian language to another would not be a problem. But how does one mold the English language to be able to have the suppleness that allows us to speak in Indian terms in this language? Very often, translators stop at having to communicate that exact thing. As I said, not the impact. So maybe it doesn't matter if you don't say moon phased. But I remember reading an extraordinary description of a woman in the moonlight in Patrick White's novels, where he did not use the word moon phased, but the beauty of that image came through in the English language beautifully. So maybe it's just that. I mean, just try and get to the sense of what was intended rather than the exact thing. But I also believe that there is another level of translation where I would like to know that the original meant this or that. And so I don't know, sometimes I think every book deserves two kinds of translations. One, the literal, which allows us to see what was, and two, the one that's more readerly and, more relatable to, as they say, in the language. But I don't have an answer.
As a footnotes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
which sort of kills the reading. Yeah, but I love long introductions in a book. I love introductions where the translator sits down and says, these were the challenges and this is how I worked with it, and where do you think I failed and where I think I may have succeeded. And that interaction, so I remember when we started this imprint at Harper called Harper Perennial, which has a little imprint, which is a little section called PS. And that postscript was always an interview between the author and the translator, the two of them talking about how they went about it or how the process came to be. And I always thought that was a really rich way of helping the reader read the translation as well. So I do think that intervention makes a lot of difference.
Sachinji, yeah.
Yeah. So when you speak of readers and when you talk of business and economics of publication, so who is the customer that you are talking about? Means, are you, if it's a Malayalam novel, then are you keeping in the mind the Malayalam readership in English? Is it larger Indian readership, or is it the overseas reader that you have in mind when you say this is the reader to whom I'm as an editor responsible to? So is that specified, concrete?
I think if we got really much better at handling data and readership targets, etc., I might actually be able to focus like that. But at the moment, what we focus on is the reader in English anywhere in the world or India. We know that it's likelier that there will be a lot of Malayalis reading, and yes, the overseas market exists quite strongly for Malayalam writing.
Because then the editing process will be different for each reader. Means, if it's the overseas reader, then the explanatory
no, I
component.
wouldn't say that actually. I would say that one does not keep the reader so much in mind as the text and what you want to do with it in terms of the translation, and what any reader, in a sense, can take away as long as they're engaging with the language of
But isn't that
target
too
language.
generalized? Means, we are assuming so many things as
Yeah.
editors.
But
And
why
are these-
why should I, as an editor, think about 5 kinds of readers and figure out who I'm publishing for? Isn't my task the text and the work, and leave the reader to discover the text wherever they are, however they are? I don't know if this sounds very naive, but I realize as I edit, I'm not thinking about the reader at all. Absolutely not. I don't know other editors here whether they think about, maybe writers think about their readers, but it doesn't come up at all. What you do know is that you do not. Okay, so there was a case of a Bengali book, I remember, Ashapurna Devi. I think there was a translation of her work that had come to editors in, well, I think I was in Penguin then I moved to Harper. I remember it came there. And every time the editors just kept saying, this is not good enough, because it kept translating. Like, the Meenakshi sort of thing of what is a Bangla word for it? The woman with fish eyes, yeah? And this translator kept saying the woman with fish eyes, and we kept saying it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And they kept saying, no, we will not change it because this is the intended, and the Bengali reader will totally get this. And we kept saying, but we are not publishing for the Bengali reader. Finally, the contract was cancelled, the book was given back. It happened, I think, with 2 different publishing houses before finally it got published, and I don't know whether the translator finally agreed. But so if we had kept that reader in mind, the Bangla reader who would understand the fish eyes, maybe we would have accepted that edit. But it didn't make sense at all because we were not thinking of a particular kind of reader.
Yes, sure, sir.
Can I add something? When we as I'm talking as an editor, when we edit translations, we said, translator, you safeguard the rights of the writer, and I, as an editor, I am safeguarding the rights of the reader. Now, your question is, who is the reader? I am the reader. I am the editor. I am safeguarding their rights. I am representing them. And I am assuming that role for myself, as she said, and there my outlook is not, I am not specifically looking for Malayalam or this and that. When I'm translating into English means a general reader who can understand reasonably good English anywhere sitting in the world. I hope that.
Yeah, no, we need to move on to the next session. So, if you will, thanks. So, just a couple of things that I want to announce before we start the next panel. One is I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Sridhar Balan over here, who's, sir? Okay, hi. A hi from you would be super nice.
Yeah, so, hi.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm kind of a very late interventionist here, and thank you so much, Chandra, for allowing me a few words. A very senior colleague in publishing once remarked to me that publishers are incorrigible optimists. And sometimes I think publishing translations is that same kind of extension of that exercise in optimism. In the late 70s and in the early 80s, if we look back at the history of publishing in India, publishers or editors who were engaged in translations, publishing translations, used to be what we used to call as back of the house. You had to really go into the inner recesses of the office with a lighted candle to try and spot them. Over the years now, I think publishers of translations, editors of translations have got to front of the house. And there's been this kind of a very signal shift in publishing focus. To a very large extent, trade publishers have managed, as Karthika said, they have managed that mix of publishing contemporary fiction, non-fiction, along with translations. But then when you have a publisher like Ratna Books, without a kind of a symbiotic support from, a general list, then you're in a bit, you're out on a limb. And once, whatever it is that you may do to try to make that translation as readable as possible and as faithful to the original, and try and give the reader, as Dinesh said, a seamless reading experience, eventually it does get translated into a tangible product, the book. And once the book has been published, then it faces all the problems that beset all other books, regardless of whatever it is that you're publishing. One of the recent exercises, and I'll conclude very soon, that we have seen with the Tamil Nadu Textbook and Educational Services Corporation, to give the full name, the funding that has been initiated has, transformed the amount of output of original works in Tamil into English and into other languages. Over the years, they have adopted taking Tamil to the world, their slogan, and bringing the world to Tamil. And I think 4 years now, 4 editions of the Chennai International Book Fair has been held. that actually shows the impetus that this kind of institutional support, governmental support, will make a complete sea change in the field of translation. Publishers are willing to come forward to do that, and now there is talk initially of extending this in the last edition of the CIBF to the other South Indian languages as well. Now, proof of the pudding is the eating, but we have to see that. But that's not happening, and this institutional that is support needs to be forthcoming in other places. That means, what does it mean? It means that with all the kind of protestations, I love my language, I want to try and preserve and protect it. Why not, try and create this initiative? The kind of funds are available, but we are not really doing much. So in that sense, I think that is there. And as I said, it's good to see the other change that has come about is the literary prizes and others that have been there. I mean, it's sad that JCB has, stopped giving out prize now, but others, that these also help to get the book noticed. And then if Book Review does special issues, editions on translations, that helps a lot. And as far as readership is concerned, well, I don't know. Just recently we saw that article that India lacks a reading culture. Be very sad if it does, but there are a lot of protestation, a lot of evidence to the contrary. And let us hope that translations, with the publishers doing this their bit, find a very firm place in the reading mix that all of you as readers hopefully go into bookshops or order through online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for pitching in. Just one small announcement. Since we're running slightly late, we're starting the next session at 10:30, and coffee will go on from about 11:15, right? 11:15 to 12, and we'll start. No? 11. Oh, you see. Oh, you wrote 15 minutes. Okay. I couldn't understand what you said. So 15 minutes, and then we come back for the next session. The next session that we have is translating across genres, Dalit writings, and translating poetry. Now, in this session, we deal with the nuts and bolts of translating across genres. What is the process of making meaning when translating the depth and political context of, say, Dalit literature? How does one translate the delicate beauty of poetry? So, to answer these and several other questions, I now hand over the floor to our panelists to understand issues that speak to the soul, but again, face the challenges of a capricious or a discerning reader and also of the market. The first speaker that I'd like to invite is Professor Nishat Zaidi, who I'm very, very happy to introduce because she's a friend and a colleague. She's a professor of English at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. She has conducted collaborative research with the Center for Indian Studies in Africa, South Africa, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University, Germany, Michigan State University, USA. Her publications include monographs, Makers of Indian Literature, Aga Shahid Ali, published by Sahitya Akademi in 2014, Terrains of Consciousness, Multilogical Perspectives on Globalization by Würzburg University Press, translations and edited books, Day and Dastan. No, just small list. Let me read it. 2018 with Alok Bhalla, Between Worlds, The Travels of Yusuf Khan, Kambal Posh, OUP 2014 with Mushir Saab, among others. So I'd now like to hand over the floor to Nishat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sucharita. Excuse me, will you permit me just 1 second? I wanted to clarify that Sucharita is starting off this theme at 10:30, and we have 5 speakers. So I feel since there are only 5 speakers for the next theme, what we will do is after the coffee break, which I request all of you to keep it to 10 minutes if possible and come back quickly, we will carry on with the rest of the speakers in this theme until about 12 o'clock. So we can start the Bengali session at 12 instead of at 11:30. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Chandradi. Thank you, Sucharita. It's a pleasure to come back to the book review platform, where one gets to meet friends from, across the fields, publishers, writers, academics, young students, researchers, scholars. Um, Today, I have to talk about translation across genres. So let me give a little context as to why I'm here in this particular panel. I am an academic. I do literary criticism, but I also translate, and I have done all kinds of translations. I translated Pawan Verma's book on Ghalib into Hindi. I translated travelogues, both 19th century travelogues, two 19th century travelogue. One of them, first Urdu travelogue, written by Yusuf Kambal Posh, that was published in 1836. Then another by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, 1860s. So 19th century Urdu texts I've translated into English. I have done some fiction translation along with renowned translation Professor Alok Bhalla, which is Intezar Hussein's Day and Dastan. I have also translated, I mean, my draft is ready, his memoir, Justiju Kya Hai, which is still not published. I haven't started this process. I'm still revisiting the translation. Then I have translated poetry as well. So I have done translations, bits of translation here and there. I have translated Ghalib's ghazals. I have translated nazms by various poets, some Pakistani Urdu women poets, and so on and so forth, Kishwar Nahid and others. Then I translated Jayant Parmar, who is Dalit poet in Urdu, who writes, it is a bilingual poet. He writes in Gujarati as well as Urdu. So I have translated his collection called Pencil or Dusri Nazme for Sahitya Academy. It was a Sahitya Academy award-winning collection. I translated that into English, which was published in 2016 or something. Now I am translating all his poems in Urdu, all his nazms in Urdu around Dalit theme. So that draft is almost ready. So I am here to talk about this process of translating across genres and translation of poetry. When we translate, especially because I'm coming from my experience of translating Urdu poetry, and Urdu ghazal is known for its refinement of taste and language and register and metaphors and figurative, language. So when one translates ghazal, one requires a different kind of toolkit. When you switch from that to a poet who is a Dalit poet, who is articulating um, his Dalit experiences in a language which does not lend itself to this kind of direct, stark articulation of empirical experience, what happens? Because Urdu poetry and Urdu literary culture is given to a certain kind of aesthetic. Dalit aesthetic is completely different from that aesthetic. So when a poet, punctures the aesthetic of Urdu literary culture to articulate his Dalit experience, and as translator, as someone who has not lived through those experiences, I try to translate it into another language which also does not really absorb those experiences so easily. How do I do it? This was a challenge that I was faced with. And that is where, my thinking about, I have also translated Premchand's play Karbala into English. So that is where I bring in my translation experience, translating from various genres. And I start thinking about the whole process of translation. Because to me, translation is not just translating from one language into another language. It is translating or communicating the depth and the power of that experience. Now, how do I translate the depth and power of that experience in a language that is different? And I agree with Karthika, and several poet translators have also said this, that we need to push English. We need to make English behave beyond its nature, beyond its its essential nature. So to me, therefore, we use these terms as cliches: translation as discovery, translation as recovery. Translation was both a discovery as well as recovery, because a lot of times it's not that the translator first interprets the text and then sets out to translate that meaning. To me, this does not happen. A lot of time, meaning reveals itself in the process of translation and retranslation. I keep on working, and then I suddenly get a sense that he's saying completely different thing. Because meaning is not there on the surface in the literary text. Meaning is often embedded. So a translator has to extract that embedded knowledge. And a lot of times, this is not monological. This is multilogical, it's polyphonic, because a writer, when he writes, you assume that this is a Urdu text, this is a Hindi text, this is that. But once a translator begins to decode, he notices that this one singular text has several other texts embedded in it. So a translator's job then is to, not job, but it comes in the process of translation and retranslation. A translator gets down to the meaning which is not there on the surface. So therefore, as I was saying, he is a Dalit poet in Urdu. Urdu aesthetics does not allow this kind of direct, stark articulation of empirical experience, some of which has shock value, some of which employs, language which is not very refined language, right? Language which is kind of lower rung language, direct language, which is not poetic language, so to say. So when a poet deliberately uses that language to articulate his experiences, right, in Urdu, which is not the aesthetics of Urdu, the poet already is doing some process of, he is engaged with some process of translation. And the translator has to carry on that process. Then when we see Dalits, we think of this as one additional theme. But this is not additive. What a Dalit poet is doing is that he's puncturing our perspective, right? He's bringing in what 13 ways of looking at a blackbird, the blackbird perspective. He wants to alter our vision of everything else, or taint our vision of everything else, or bring us out of our comfort zone. And so a Dalit poet writing about Dalit theme is not like a separate box, right? That here are these 5 themes and then 6th theme is Dalit. No, Dalit poet wants us to relook at the universe around us, relook at the world around us from a different perspective, right? This altered perspective punctures all our understanding of the world, knowing, sensing the world, and being in the world. And therefore, to me, translation offers that scope, which everyone says negotiation, also contamination, right? And that contamination is necessary from our locations where we are located. We need to contaminate English, we need to contaminate all those perspectives of contamination, and it is through this contamination where reparation is possible, coming together and repair all those identities, all those cells that have been marginalized, that have been pushed to us, to the borderline. And even when we talk about Dalit, we celebrate Dalit poetry. There is so much market for it. The moment you say Dalit poetry, there is a separate market. And also in academic industry, which I say, where you say scholars are pressurized to churn papers, right? So there is an industry for it. Having said that, to me, translating Jayant Parmar's poetry, especially his Dalit Nazms, allows, because he takes up themes which are, given to Urdu poetry which come from Urdu aesthetic like morning breeze. Okay, so you would think of a beautiful nazam around it, and he begins like that. But somewhere something changes, and his Dalit perspective taints our perspective of morning breeze, right? So he brings in these, all these aesthetic objects, aesthetic metaphors of Urdu, and he punctures them, right? So translation, process of translation allows us to see how, how a text speaks in many tongues. What we hear and what we catch on to, that is where, translator's role is important. So, who you are writing for, the industry, all those questions come later. Okay, first is your direct interaction with the text, a translator's interaction with the text, and especially when you are translating texts like Premchand's Karbala, which is actually a play. It's a play in Hindi, but it's a play about Islamic history. And Premchand is writing that play in order to address the issue of communalism in 20th century India, 1920s, when communal conflict was at its peak. So the play is a very complex play. It does not speak in one tongue. And as translator, my role is to see, these polyphonies, these interactions, these negotiations that are happening within the text. So that is how I see translation across genres, and I see the potential of translation as a reparative exercise. You repair, you recover, you repair all those broken, battered identities, of history. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishat, for such a brilliant start and for sticking to the time. Our next speaker is Mr. Karthika Sengupta. I'd like to introduce him. He was awarded the 2018 Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize and the 2024 Nilim Kumar National Honor. Has had his poetry featured in various publications, including The Common, The Florida Review Online, Headway Quarterly, The Lake, Amethyst Review, Drake, Waterlet's Outlook, and Madras Courier. His selected poems were released by Transcended Zero Press, Houston, in August 2025. He has authored 14 books of poetry in prose, published 2 volumes of translations, and edited 9 anthologies. Sir is the chief editor of Ethos Literary Journal and leads the English division at Hawgal Publishers Private Limited, one of the top independent presses in India. He resides in New Delhi and Shantiniketan. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sucharita. Thank you, Chandrachari, for inviting me to this wonderful seminar. I'll take only a few minutes, but I begin with that question to Karthika, that when you told us that the contract had to be cancelled because the word the translator chose was not doing well with the target language. So you kept the readers in mind, right? So we, yeah. So because you asked us whether as editor we should keep the readers in mind, who the readers would be. So we, end of the day, we do keep the readers in mind for whom the translation is targeted at. And Amol, with your question, as publisher, we have 2 versions of Rabindranath Tagore's Khirer Putul. When I say Khirer Putul, it means something like a doll made of thickened milk. But when we say kheer, kheer in Hindi means the rice porridge. But in Bangla, kheer means very thick, almost semi-solid milk. We published 2 versions of the same text by Obun Thakur with 2 different translators. And end of the day, the new version, which means the second volume that came out about a year ago, that became more successful than the previous version. The reason being, the translation matters, the flow of the text. it matters the most. That is the driving force that actually bring more readers to the translated text. Now I'm supposed to talk about translating poetry. uh, I have three functions in it. I'm a translator myself. I translate poetry. I translate from Bengali into English. I edit translated poetry, so I work as an editor as well, and I publish translated poetry. So when a translator translates Bengali poetry into English, we as publisher publish it. So I can talk about all these three aspects, but when it comes to, if I'm to talk about publishing translated poetry, it's a very difficult thing. Very difficult means it has extremely limited market. Poetry in its original form has a niche market. And when the poetry gets translated, when that same poetry in translation gets translated into other languages, the market is even more volatile. So the publisher has to decide whom to translate and how the translated poetry will work with the readers. So when we published Professor Sachidanandan's poetry, because he translates his poetry himself from Malayalam to English. Professor, it was a safe game when we translated Sachidanandan. I say so because readers in India, they identify Professor Sachidanandan as an important figure for Indian English poetry. Very few actually know that he translates his own Malayalam poetry into English. We, generally, we consider him to be an English poet. So when we published his poems, it was an easy game for us as publisher. But when we published a contemporary Bengali poet like Abhinandan Mukherjee, who lives in one of the districts of West Bengal, it's Midnapur. It was a tough game because from commissioning a translator for his Bengali poems to editing the translated poems for the keeping in mind the target readers, and finally bringing out the published volume and and then distribution. It was a really tough game, and it was not at all a safe thing. We again published poet Shaburi Roy. Shaburi Roy is more known as a Bengali poet, but the thing is, who would read her translated poems? It's important to negotiate this issue, and the translator is just sitting behind me. The translator, the original poet, the editor, the publisher, they all work together to make this volume of translated poems, which is called Buddha and Void, a successful collection of poems. Although I'm talking about poetry, but we were literally thrilled when we learned that one of our volumes in fiction, it's called The Blight and Seven Short Stories, written by Bitan Chakraborty, which was translated by Maluti Mukherjee, who lives in the south. It was awarded the 2024-25 Tagore Literary Prize. But the question finally is it really worth the pain publishing a volume of translated poems or publishing a volume of translated fiction? that only readers or the buyers can actually answer. Sucharita, my speech ends here.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Simi Ali. It gives me absolute great pleasure to introduce her because not only is she a lovely, brilliant poet, but also because we worked on an anthology which will be coming out later this year, being published by Speaking Tiger. So I'm hoping at least some of you in this room are going to buy and read it. I just used this chance. So just to introduce Simi, she's an editor, translator, critic, and a poet. She's the poetry editor at Muse India and is associated editorially with the literary journal Parcham and the publishing house Red River. She's the author of 4 poetry collections and has edited and co-edited several anthologies. Most recently co-edited a volume of Loneliness published by Yoda Press in collaboration with Simon & Schuster. She regularly reviews books for leading literary platforms, and her work has appeared widely in journals and anthologies, including publications by Oxford University Press. Over to you, Simi.
Thank you so much, Sujata. Good morning, and thank you for having me here. I think I'll be the only one reading from a paper, so forgive me for doing that. So I translated a selection of Asang Ghosh's poetry, and through that I'll be using 2 of his poems here, and I'll be looking at Can English Hold Caste? Ejaz Ahmed, in his book In Theory, observed that English has increasingly become the language through which a substantial archive of Indian literature is accessed through translation. Now, this remark invites a very important question, which is when texts that emerge from deeply local and socially stratified realities enter English, what kind of meanings travel and what kind of experiences resist that transfer? So this paper grows out of my engagement with translating selected poems by Dalit poet Asang Ghosh from Hindi into English. My concern is not only with the movement of words across languages, but with the movement of a historically situated experience shaped by caste, humiliation, resistance, and assertion. I do not treat translation here as a purely technical act. Rather, it becomes a site where questions of responsibility, representation, and power inevitably arise. Language is never neutral. It carries the imprint of the social worlds that produce it. While working on these poems, I found myself confronting a fundamental issue. What linguistic resources are available to articulate experiences that have long been pushed to the margins of public speech? If caste regulates access to dignity, labor, and recognition, it also shapes the tonal and rhetorical possibilities through which suffering and defiance are voiced. The question that follows is whether a language is shaped by different historical trajectories can hold this density without muting its force. Now, Dalit writing does not sit comfortably within the usual ways in which South Asian literature is analyzed. It's not simply post-colonial writing, nor does it neatly fit into categories like realism or nationalism. Its urgency comes from caste, a structure internal to Indian society. At the same time, translation is one of the primary ways such writing travels beyond its immediate linguistic context. This means that the choices made in translation, the tone, the register, the sharpness, the restraint, shape how readers unfamiliar with caste will understand the reality being described. Now, Dalit writing is often reduced to testimony, treated primarily as a documentation of suffering. While the political force of these texts is undeniable, reading them only as social evidence risks overlooking the ways in which they are crafted. In Ghosh's poetry, protest is not merely stated. It is shaped through tone, irony, repetition, and sudden shifts in address. The anger in these poems is not accidental, it is structured. Paying attention to these formal choices allows us to see that the political and the literary are not separate domains here. They operate through one another.
one of the central challenges I encountered while translating Ghosh's poetry was the rendering of everyday caste violence that operates through gesture, routine, and spatial hierarchy rather than overt declaration. Now, this becomes particularly visible in the poem, The Order of Caste. The Hindi title was Jati Ki Boo. So, I'm going to read that poem out, the translated one. The Order of Caste. Next to a closed door, donning a Gandhi topi, seated stiffly on a stool draped in white clothes is his man. Sometimes an orderly, at times a doorman, sometimes a peon, and sometimes a servant. He hangs from his white shirt a red strip of cloth, climbing down from his shoulders, an ancient badge, and does not think of himself any less than a collector. Whenever the bell rings, he enters, pushing through the door with a lowered head, standing to take orders. Carrying the files in and out and in, he keeps bringing and taking them. When I order, bring me water, I begin sensing a glint of disappointment on his face. He dislikes getting water for me. Taking immense pains to avoid receiving such orders, he slams down on my table a glass, water. It splatters, flows spreading on my glass table, spilling into the map of India, soaking the files, seeping to my mind like a dagger, this water. I know the water left in the glass is a shot of poison for me, but still, I drink it. For his arrogance, I don't even punish him, so that every time I ask him for water, it continues hurting his sense of superiority, that he continues to feel vexed on witnessing even these days. Now, the poem depicts a bureaucratic setting in which the speaker, despite occupying an official position, remains marked by caste. The man who performs routine tasks like carrying files, responding to the bell, bringing water, is visibly aware of his social location and resents having to extend service. The hostility here is not expressed through open confrontation, but through small, repeated gestures, hesitation, reluctance, the manner in which the glass is placed, the refusal of respectful address. What the poem reveals is that institutional authority does not erase caste recognition. The act of offering water becomes charged with humiliation, not because the task itself is unusual, but because caste memory infiltrates an otherwise routine exchange. Now, translating this scene required attention not only to the meaning but to the rhythm and accumulation, the way discomfort builds through repetition. In Hindi, the tension sustained through tonal restraint and implication. English can reproduce the sequence of actions, but it does not automatically carry the everyday social codes that make these gestures legible within the caste context. The moment where spilled water begins to seep across files, maps, and finally into the speaker's consciousness transforms a mundane object into a carrier of injury. Here, translation involves relocating context rather than merely transferring vocabulary. What the order of caste makes evident is that caste frequently operates through the body, which is through posture, proximity, labor, and repeated instruction, rather than through explicit naming. This makes it this makes it particularly difficult to translate because the meaning of these gestures are immediately legible within one social context, but not necessarily within another. If this poem works through implication and accumulation, another poem titled What is Your Caste confronts the reader through blunt address and verbal aggression. I will first read the translation and then the Hindi original so that we can hear how the tone and the force shift across languages. First, the translation. What is your caste? He assumed that I must belong to a higher caste. Curious, he asked, what is your caste? For me, it was an ordinary question, one I had endured every day. I replied, Chamar. At once, his face tightened with distaste. I shouted, don't spit, swallow it, you fool. Now the Hindi. कौन जात हो? उसे लगा कि मैं ऊंची जात का हूँ. मारे उत्सुकता के वो पूछ बैठा, कौन जात हो? मेरे लिए तो ये प्रश्न सामान्य था, रोज झेलता आया हूँ. जवाब दिया मैंने चमार. ये सुनकर उसका मुंह कसैला हो गया. मैं जोर से चिल्लाया, थूक मत, निगल साले. Now, what becomes audible here is not merely a shift in vocabulary, but a change in intensity, particularly in the closing imperative. The caste identifier and the final command in the original carries layers of everyday insult, defiance, and embodied history that resist seamless equivalence in English without either dilution or explanatory intrusion. The translation therefore reveals both what can be carried across and what remains partially untranslatable. Together, these two poems demonstrate how Dalit poetry emerges from location where ordinary speech is saturated with histories of exclusion as well as gestures of refusal. While translating these poems, I repeatedly encountered the limits of English in registering the affective density of caste. In conclusion, translation then does not simply relocate marginalization into another linguistic space, it alters the conditions under which it is heard. Even so, the act of translating opens new circuits of reception, allowing readers otherwise distant from these realities to confront them. Translation then is marked by both responsibility and limitation. It allows these poems to travel into English and reach new readers, but it cannot entirely carry the social history from which they arise. Something of that different remains and perhaps must remain. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Seema. I think so much of what you said ties up with what Nishat said. And now we're on to our final speaker, Vasanta ma'am. Ma'am, you spoke yesterday as well, but I'm going to reintroduce you anyway. Vasanta Surya is a translator, poet, writer, and journalist. She started out as a journalist, moved to poetry, writing for children, and then translation. She has written more than 300 investigative articles, features, and reviews on subjects of social change and education, 2 books of poetry in English, 1 book-length translation of a Bundeli folk poem, a selection from classical Tamil poetry, 2 anthologies of short stories, and 7 novels translated from Tamil. Ma'am, over to you now. 10 minutes? Thanks. Thanks. Yeah.
I found that fascinating, and particularly the translation, as because I understand Hindi. I wish I could speak the Tamil also, but I'm afraid people won't understand. Anyway, this session is about translating across genres, Dalit writings, and translating poetry. About translating across genres, I don't have much to say. If it means translating poetry into prose, my passion is to translate poetry as poetry, even if the prosody is different, even if the rhymes and rhythm are different, as long as the uyir is the same. The word uyir in Tamil means the prana, the life breath. And as in Tamil literature, poetry is woven into prose. I must keep that in my translations. That poetry comes from the culture of reality, realism. As for Dalit writing, as long as Dalits are seen as inferior human beings and casteism exists, writing about Dalits and translation of Dalit experience as a distinct phenomenon will be there. On the front page of today's Indian Express, there's news about a girl in a Odisha village, the first graduate in her community to graduate, who dared to get a government job as a helper cook in an Anganwadi, and villagers stopped sending their children there because they would be polluted by eating food cooked and served by her. This is the truth. This is our reality. All our poetry and all our writing must come from that. Otherwise, who cares? Translating Dalit writing and translating poetry came together for me. In Tamil Nadu, the new poetry, Pudu Kavite movement of the mid-20th century, freed literary Tamil from stylistic constraints and made us listen to the actual poetry on living tongues as people spoke and sang and declaimed. How did I go to Dalit experience? It looks as though there's no connection. What I did was first to explore one ancient current, Nammarvar's Thiruvaimuri, nothing to do with caste as such. Intrigued by a visit to the poet's birthplace in Alvar Tirunagari, I made a selection of his 8th century pashrams, and I stayed with those exquisite verses for 28 years. Here are the first 3 lines of Ashram 110.2 in my translation to plunge within. Behind my eyes, love stands watch. Even in thoughts of worldly business, love shows up. I needed that plunge for what happened next to me. This is love of supreme reality. which contains paying close attention to worldly business, what is happening around us. This is the awareness from which literature springs. Minnie Krishnan, whose role as an enabler of translations in India is well known, encouraged me to look into the depths of the Indian social reality, which meant the reality of Dalit lives, Dalit experience. I moved from translating works on social reformist themes concerning mainly the upper caste to writers who present the starkness of Dalit life and how that life did not quite fit into the straitjackets of several socialist theories. Marxism throws light on it, certainly, but though its formulations may reshape the theoretical surface, they cannot fully illuminate the continuing oppression of caste, now disguised in many ways. Dalit fiction and poetry are extraordinarily expressive. The cynicism of casteism and the way it continues to be accommodated and justified within Indian consciousness. Let me read out to you 2 poems here to show you what I mean. Please be patient. My translations. Debt, S. Sukirtarani. A piece of hide sewn into the base of the basket she sets out. The blunt-edged scrap iron sheet, piled with gathered ashes, is heavy in her arms. Behind a house that's fit to split with too many people in it, she goes, stops there, her eyes falling on a square iron sheet swinging from a nail. Raising it with one hand, she throws a handful of ashes inside. And then, scraping her forearm on the hole's jagged edges, she sweeps and scoops from left to right, tilting it into the basket. And then, when she's full, she wipes away yellow water streaming down her brow. And then, with easy grace, she goes away. What I can do for her today is not to defecate once. So this is one thing. And then, this is the truth, even now. It's not different, and that we can't forget that. Just a minute. Sorry. Take a few time. God. And then, sorry. God. I'll read another one then, because the one I thought I wanted to read very much. Excuse me. A lesson in action and reaction. Against each blow struck throbs a frenzied parade drum. A splatter of dung stays stuck where it's flung, but a ball will bounce back from every kick. Slaps on the rump can make a goat change course. A bull always rebels. Primed in flame, a bamboo cane springs up straight, sheds its ancient hunch. No force of gravity can quell flame tongues rising up in rebellion. Action and reaction may go by rules that science still cannot explain. A stiff stance of mere bravado just will not match the sheer daring of a rod that's been bent many times. This is the kind of experience we are seeing all the time. And just one little one that I will want to read. Please be patient with me. I'm just not very efficient. Here it is. This is a poem by Yayanadi. The earlier one was by Tai Kandasamy. Yayanadi has written, "Do not search in my words for anything that could give you a high. Ash of half-burnt bone lies strewn about in them, and smoking ghosts of ancestors long dead or gone missing. Oozing from my fingers is blood. From the slaughter block stench of my lines, you'll know it. This house of mine of mud and slime, through which no fine flower scent has ever wafted. My father's young brothers, Muni Ratnam's, curses when he got home, bone weary, worn out, dead drunk. These are the burdens on the backs of my herds of words. into great grief-stricken howls have dissolved our songs and pictures, never to be found again. The light welling from our lamps has been stifled in terrible fires. The dung milk my forefathers were given to drink is what I'm vomiting as poetry. This is just not pretty poetry. But it's poetry. It's very, very much poetry. And this is what fascinated me about this. Then all these poems that I translated, I had to become not just those writers, I had to become the persons described by them. I managed somehow to translate them. I even managed to do a long poem by an anonymous poet who described a massacre in Venmani village in 1968, when a hut with 44 people was burned down because they had asked for the addition of a kilo of paddy as wage. Like wild things chased and caught in a sack, they fled into a roadside shack, filled it till they spilled from its split-open roof. Dark as night, that demon hut gulped down its prey. Doors bared like lips in a gloating grin, that sinister shape squatted on its haunches in a glistening rain of kerosene. Oh, roared the flames with a hoarse shriek. Do these poets only have bitter, angry voices? No. One poet, Ravi Kumar's poems, depict the yearning of young people as they strive to build friendships across caste lines. This is our posterity, our children, their children, everybody's children, is trying to be human. And these caste boundaries are preventing them from being human. I translated these and other poems of Dalits, but when it came to translating a Dalit novel, I just could not bring myself to put Bama's Karku into English when that translation project was offered to me. Bama has written of indescribable cruelties. I flinched then from bringing them into my own consciousness, and I did not want my English, given my background, to dilute that rage of hers. But by this time, that reality had seized hold of me. I could not turn my eyes away from the horrors Dalits went through, away from the caste-bound lives of the people on whose labor we all depend. I went soon after to Cho Dharman's Kuhai, an authentic contemporary myth in which poetry flows like a rushing river. Here is a writer who should be known internationally, like several from Tamil Nadu, and it can only be through translation. We translators who are lucky enough to know English must turn our attention to the reality of caste and bonded labor. This country's reality, especially its psychological reality, the way things not only are, but are allowed to be. Translating Tamil poetry, ancient and modern, including Dalit poetry and the evocative fiction of several writers like Evayam and Cho Dharman, has meant listening to different kinds of Tamil spoken across Tamil Nadu. At one time, I translated a poem about Nandanar, the medieval untouchable who did dare to approach the deity of Chidambaram temple. Now, we read every day about a temple that's not opening its doors to a Dalit or a woman. Through the pulsating Tamil of such writing, we hear truths that are not merely news items, truths that cannot be ignored. While awareness of the antiquity and the wealth of the language are a part of Tamil consciousness, it is this modern Tamil, rich in imagery and bristling with irony and wit, that I now translate. Today's writers freely help themselves to the idiom, the proverbs, the zing of spoken Tamil, embellished with Tamilish. The Owl by Cho Dharman brings poetry and prose together as it depicts the ground level reality of Dalit life in the Karishal black soil region of Tamil Nadu. And Evayam's Order from the Sky is a selection of short stories that sparkle with wit and offer piercing insights into the lives of men and women today. He doesn't call himself a Dalit writer. And I've often wondered why, and also I understand also. He doesn't want to be labeled a Dalit writer. And I completely understand, because he writes about his community, others, but he's just, don't give me these labels. I'm a human being. That's what he's trying to say. Unbound, his novel about a Kuthu artist. Kuthu is the folk art of Tamil Nadu, theatre art, like Tamasha in Maharashtra and other places, is based on the true story of a girl from that pariah caste pledged to a temple deity for life. It contains a smattering of devotional songs sung on the stage in the folk idiom, sprinkled with rousing mid 20th century rhetoric in which Tamil excels. Translation is meant, in short, for me, waking up and listening to the voices coming to me from other languages, voices that tell about today's reality. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
So we are very happy to also have among us Mr. Malbir Madhopuri, who was in this panel but is in this panel but has just arrived. So you're in the nick of time for your presentation. So I'd like to introduce you. Balbir Madhupuri is an eminent writer and accomplished translator. His writings are focused on issues related to oppressed and depressed classes, especially Dalits. His experiments with truth began at a much younger age when he worked as a child laborer and agricultural worker. His autobiography, Changiya Rukh, in Punjabi, has gone through several editions. OUP dubbed in English in 2010, and its 10th expression appeared in 2023. In Russian and Polish languages, CRC is ready for publication. Balbirji's novel Mitti Bol Paye won a prestigious international Dhahan Punjabi Literature Prize 2021. Novel critics have penned down this as one of the best novels of the 21st century. Balbir Madhupuri ji has authored 11 books, translated 45 books, and the same number he has edited in his mother tongue Punjabi. His writings are decorated with several awards. He retired from the Ministry of INB, Government of India, Deputy Director in 2015. At present, he is Director, Punjabi Bhavan, Punjabi Sahit Sabha, and Editor, Samkali Sahit, a Punjabi Quarterly. Sir, over to you. Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you, all of you. I would like to tell you that I am not director of now of Punjabi Bhavan. I have left 1 year ago, and doing my own writings at home, 24 hours. I'm doing not translation in these days, but I am writing my own novel or other things. One thing more, I have translated 45 books. It was the old, I think, not updated from my side also. I have translated for 45 books, edited 40 books, and authored 15. So it is also in here. I would also repeat all these things. And I would like to tell you that I want to speak in, it is not my first language, English is not my first language, and I would like to speak in Hindi also. I'm mixed.
कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਵੀ ਬੋਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ
Yes. ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਵੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਾੜੀ ਮੋਟੀ ਬੋਲ ਲਓ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੰਤਾ ਸਮਝ ਹੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ
Okay.
ਓਕੇ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ
Respected chair, distinguished guests, dear friends, it is an honor for me to speak here in an important and valuable seminar, Echoes Across Tongues. I stand before you, but sitting before you, not only as a translator, but as a person, author, whose life has been shaped by books, languages, and struggles. First of all, I would like to say that English is not my first language. My thoughts and expressions are deeply rooted in my mother tongue, Punjabi. I request your kind understanding. My journey with literature began in difficult circumstances. As a child, I worked as a laborer and earned 75 पैसे पैसा बोलते हैं जो पैसे बोलते हैं मेरे को नहीं पता earned 75 पैसे for half a day's work to support my father's large family. When I entered college in 1972, my half-day wage increased to 1.5 rupees. That small amount of money was precious to me, not only for the survival but for books. एक इसमें मैं थोड़ा सा, जैसे कोई फॉर एग्जांपल जैसे कोई चीज़ ना, कुर्सी भी है चाहे चारपाई है, वो ढीली सी हो जाती है ना, साइड से ची ची करती रहती है, तो उसको कहते हैं फाना ठोकना। उसमें कुछ ना कुछ लगा देते हैं ताकि आवाज़ ज़्यादा ना आए। तो मैं ये शेयर करना चाहता हूँ कि जब मैं बच्चा था, मेरी पढ़ने की लगन बहुत ज़्यादा थी, तो मेरे पास तो पैसे ही नहीं थे, ना फैमिली के पास थे। तो मैंने जो कूड़े करकट के ढेर होते हैं ना, उससे जो लिफाफे होते हैं अखबारों के, पुरानी अखबारों में कुछ ना कुछ होता, वो ही पढ़ता रहता था, अपनी मर्जी से ही पढ़ता रहता था। मेरे को कोई कहता नहीं था कि तू भाई पढ़ ले, ये कर ले, वो कर ले। और साथ साथ मैं लेबर भी करता था, पशुओं के लिए अपने जो होते हैं उनके लिए भी सारा कुछ करना, वो भी मेरे हिस्से में था, और मैं लगातार ये करता रहा। A book van from the Punjabi Book Center Jalandhar used to bring affordable books for students priced at 50 paise, 1 rupee or 1.5 rupees. Though inexpensive, they carried immense intellectual wealth. I was especially drawn to translated literature, particularly Soviet works. The autobiography, My Childhood, My Apprenticeship by Maxim Gorky, and the novel How the Steel Was Tempered by Nikolai Ostrovsky, and My Dagestan by Rasul Gamzatov deeply influenced me. Through translation, these writers entered my life and expanded my world. It was then that a thought arose in my mind, one day I too should become a translator. Years later, I translated the children's book When Daddy Was a Little Boy by Alexander Ruskin. It was serialized in Punjabi Daily Nawa Zamana in 1982. In those days, I translated many articles on the Cold War, world peace, and science, often with the help of dictionaries and discussions with friends. Telling you the truth, that translation became my classroom and my university at my borrowed room. Borrowed room में इसलिए कहता हूँ कि we have a large family had, तो 2 कमरे थे हमारे पास। एक में हम पशु बांध लेते, एक में हम सारे सो जाते थे। तो उसमें मेरे पास पढ़ने के लिए कुछ भी नहीं था, रहने को भी है नहीं था कुछ भी। तो मैंने अपने फादर को रिक्वेस्ट की कि यू शुड आस्क समवन नियर बाई कि वो मेरे को एक कमरा दे दें, खाली पड़ा रहता तो मैं उसमें पढ़ लूँगा। तो उन्होंने बात की और फिर वो कमरा मेरे को दे दिया, जिसमें कोई खिड़की नहीं लगी हुई थी, ग्रिल लगी हुई थी। फिर वो हमने मैनेज कर लिया, उसको ढक लिया, जैसे पराली समझते हैं ना, जिसका धुआं पंजाब को ही आता, रास्ते में कहीं रुकता नहीं है वो, है ना। तो उस तरीके से हमने जो वो करके अरेंजमेंट है, तो मैं उस कमरे में 9 साल रहा, पढ़ता रहा, क्योंकि उनके पास स्पेयर था, उनका अपना बड़ा घर था, कुछ और घर था। तो 9 साल मैं उसी में रहकर पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन की। एनी हाउ, ओवर द past 45 years, I have translated around 45 books, written about 40, and authored 15. My work includes translations of Lajja by Taslima Nasreen, short stories by Lushan, and writings, short stories from South African authors, exposing the brutality of racism. I translated an anthology of poems by black women titled Black Torch. इसमें मैं एक बात बताना चाहता हूँ कि when those people were in the movement for their freedom of their land, तो जो औरतें थी, इसलिए मैंने की वो किताब, वो भी मैं रद्दी से ढूंढी जी, रद्दी जो होती है ना उसमें से। जो ब्लैक औरतें थी उनको बंद कर देते थे गोरे, अंग्रेज कहना चाहिए। और अंग्रेज़ों ने उस कमरे में जिसमें कोई भी औरत रहती है जो जो फ्रीडम मूवमेंट में थी, तो उसको ऐसे ना दीवार टाइप कर देते थे, तो वो अपने बच्चों को नहीं देख सकती थी। तो अंदर अकेली रहेगी, जितने साल रहेगी अकेली रहेगी, बीमारियां लगती हैं, दवाइयाँ नहीं देनी। और पुलिस वाला आता है, देख के एक चक्कर लगा के चला जाता था। इसके साथ जुड़ी हुई बात और शेयर करता हूँ। इफ़ यू हैव टाइम, द टाइम लिमिट इज़ ओनली 10 मिनट्स आई थिंक, बट आई वांट 2-3 मिनट्स मोर। वो इसलिए बात बतानी ज़रूरी है कि जैसे बच्चे स्कूल में ब्लैक बच्चे जाते हैं, तो वो क्या करते थे कि जो पढ़ ना जाएं, ये चेतन ना हो जाएं, इन वो रास्ते में ना शीशे जो होते हैं वो फेंक देते थे। फिर जो गाड़ियाँ वापस आती थी वो क्या करते थे, जब मैं डिस्टर्ब हुआ इस बात से कई दिन कई महीने, तो वो एक खड्डा खोद के रखते थे। जब बच्चे स्कूल से आते थे तो उनको वहीं फेंक कर ऊपर से जिंदा एक ऊपर मिट्टी डाल देते थे। अदर थिंग वो था कि जैसे लड़कियां 11 साल की हुई, 12-13 साल की होती थी, तो ब्लैक लड़कियों को उन्होंने सेंटर, वेलफेयर सेंटर खोले हुए थे कि इनकी हम ट्रीटमेंट करेंगे, हम इनके करेंगे। तो एक्चुअली वो एक्सपेरिमेंट करते थे, उनका यूट्रस, ओवरियन वो सारा निकाल देते थे। जो ऑपरेशन किया जाता था वो भी उसको सिलाई नहीं करते थे, ऐसे खुला छोड़ देते थे। आफ्टर दैट जब भी वो ठीक हो जाती थी तो जो आर्मी थी अंग्रेज़ों की उसको सप्लाई कर देते ताकि इनको बच्चा ना हो जाए कोई। तो इस तरीके से जो जुल्म हुआ जहाँ होता है, अभी तो उतना नहीं है रेसिज्म का इफेक्ट, आपने सबने पढ़ा ही है कि कैसे कैसे जिंदा लोग जगाए, बच्चों को छीन के ले जाते थे उनके पेरेंट्स से कि हम इसको पढ़ाना है। वो पढ़ाते नहीं थे, पिटाई करते थे, मारते थे, आखिर में स्कूल के अंदर ही दफना के मिट्टी डाल देते थे। आपने खबरें सारी पढ़ी हों, कनाडा अमेरिका में सारा कुछ जो हुआ। एनी हाउ, इसलिए मैंने ये सारी ट्रांसलेशन, मैंने 5 किताबें जो साउथ अफ्रीकन डिफरेंट राइटर्स जिसके 52 कंट्रीज़ ऑफ द कॉन्टिनेंट है, उसके अलग अलग देशों के मैंने राइटर लिए और ट्रांसलेशन किया। I translated an anthology of poems by black women titled Black Torch, reflecting their resistance and struggle for the freedom of their land. I also translated the edited दलित काव्य एंड ब्लैक काव्य। तो मैंने इसलिए किया कि जहाँ के भी दुख दर्द थोड़े थोड़े मिलते हैं, वो तो ब्लैक हैं, वो तो अपना कलर छुपा ही नहीं सकते। हमारे तो जहाँ कास्ट छुपा के रहा जा सकता है ना, कोई जो मर्जी बोल दे, जहाँ कास्ट की ज़्यादा वही प्रॉब्लम है। हमारे छुप जाते हैं, ऐसे छुपे रुस्तम बहुत होते हैं। तो वहाँ जो है वो तो बेचारे अपना कलर भी छुपा नहीं सकते, कहाँ जाएंगे। सीधा देखा, पर्सनली मैं कई लोगों से बात हुई है मेरी, ब्रिंगिंग टुगेदर द वॉइसेस ऑफ ब्लैक एंड द दलित पोएट्स हु स्पीक्स ऑफ जस्टिस, इक्वालिटी, सोशलिज्म, एंटी casteism and anti-racism. Among the works closest to my heart are My Childhood on My Shoulders by Shivraj Singh Bechain, Uttar Pradesh, and My Father Balaiya Y.B. Satyanarayana, Andhra Pradesh. By translating these autobiographies, I wanted to show that the pain and social realities marginalized, एक्स अनटचेबल मैं इसलिए शब्द यूज़ कर रहा हूँ कि अब संविधान के तौर पे वी आर नॉट अनटचेबल, वी आर शेड्यूल कास्ट, बट सेम इज ट्रेडिशन इज गोइंग ऑन। एक्स हम हो गए हैं लेकिन है वैसे ही है सब कुछ। Realities of marginalized ex-untouchable communities in North and South India are similar. Only the scripts are different. I also translated Reminiscences and Remembrance of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar by Nanak Chandra Rattu, which highlights the struggle and vision of this great leader. Most recently, in 2023, I translated Bachcho Suno Kahani, stories by Lev Tolstoy for children. For me, translation is not a mechanical act. It is a moral and cultural responsibility. I choose books that promote secularism, rationality, scientific temper, and humanism. I prioritize work that challenge casteism and racism. Translation, in my understanding, is a bridge between cultures and a tool for social transformation. Whenever I face difficulties in understanding a word or context, I consult dictionaries and engage in dialogue with friends. This process strengthens the bridge between languages and deepens my own understanding. I draw inspiration from our own rich tradition. The Guru Granth Sahib, compiled by Guru Arjan Dev Ji, includes the composition of 36 saints and poets from diverse regions, languages, and backgrounds. It stands as a living example of inclusivity and secular vision. No language was considered inferior, no community was excluded. This spirit teaches us that language belongs to humanity, not to any one caste, religion, and region. Punjabi itself is enriched by thousand words from Arabic and Persian. For example, Ardas, Rehras, Khalsa, Nihang, Jafarnama, Hukamnama, Nishan Sahib, Bunga, Kila, Waqt, and many more. Language grows through exchange, not isolation. In my translations and writings, I often use Hindustani in natural blend of languages because it reflects the speech of ordinary people. I believe literature must reach the masses, not remain confined to elite circles. Friends, my life journey from laborer to translator, author has taught me that books can change destinies. Translation allowed me to cross borders without a passport. It gave me dignity, purpose, and connection with the wider world. In the end, I am grateful to the book reviews, to the and to the organizer for providing me this opportunity to share my life experiences with you at this esteemed center. Thank you very much.
ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਮਾਧੋਪੁਰੀ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਏ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਪੈਨਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਅਦਾ ਪਚੱਦਾ ਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਸੀ Chandra, do we have time for question and answers or should we take that into okay all right okay so 10 minutes for Q&As I'm opening up the floor for Q&As yeah okay Arunav sir first and then Amol yeah please oh you I thought you oh okay fine Amol please and if you could just keep your question crisp yeah
One was, I mean, he's not here, Sengupta ji, that about the translation, I'm just coming back to that thing, that what happens if if the book gets stuck because of the translation issue, in the sense that, again, that there are two scholars equally important, and the publisher cannot choose ke kiska le jaye because of the problem that they have personal attachment or personal thing, and they are this thing that they, and that is something that I have seen, that they don't want to antagonize one or the other. So which scholars, and the book gets stuck because of that, that the project gets shelved or something like that. And the second thing was just to do with what Balbir ji was saying, that just regarding that do we take translators at face value when it comes to books like fictional detective novels or something like Holocaust survivors' memoirs? Um, Given that you don't know the language, for instance, Icelandic, if someone is translating from Icelandic like Victoria Kripp does for an um, Arnaldur Indridsson, that he's an Icelandic author. So I was just wondering whether people should take a translator as face value, given that they don't know the original language, and it's very difficult, like the Icelandic or from some of the African languages like Isihosa or Bantu languages like Zulu. So I was just wondering whether what kind of I mean, what are the problems if we take a translator at his or her face value?
हाँ जी सर.
पहली बात तो ये है कि मैं जो ट्रांसलेशन किया वो इंग्लिश और हिंदी से की है. मेरे को उधर की लैंग्वेज के नाम भी जो है ना इतने नहीं पता, कि जैसे बहुत सारे नाम हैं उनके, अलग अलग कम्युनिटीज़ के, बहुत सारी लैंग्वेज है. तो मैंने हिंदी और इंग्लिश से किया. मेरी इंग्लिश लिखना और बात है, उसको पढ़ना और ट्रांसलेट करना और बात है. तो उतना मैं कर लेता हूँ. नहीं, जस्ट आई एम टेलिंग यू दैट I translated my all books from English and Hindi, not from the original language of the author. Thank you.
Matt, please.
This is not really Q&A, it's just C, which is, or O, which is observation or comment. I just have been listening in a lot of yesterday and right from the beginning today, and I was just thinking, and I'm speaking only as a reader, so I don't qualify as writer, reviewer, or, I teach also occasionally. And I wanted to say that, when we are struggling with language, the first thing about any language, whatever it is, the mother tongue or the official language or the language that we train in, it is still a very flawed medium. And I think we need to accept that as the basis of all our attempts to communicate, reach out, connect, translate, repair, restore, whatever it is that we are doing with our lives. So I wanted to say that, the problems that we are seeing about the English language not being adequate or not being enough, which many people have voiced, I'm saying this as a student of literature. We started, for instance, looking at the Russians, the Progress Publishing was what was available to us in the 70s and 80s, when we were buying them furiously before the publishing world exploded and suddenly you got, big English houses translating these texts. And yes, there was a difference in the narrative, but did we lose the energy or the momentum that the text brought to us in a translation which may not have been very, very good? And I think this is where we need to understand how important translation is, because it allows us to connect. I remember this text that I studied, and then it was also part of Delhi University. This is John Osborne's Look Back in Anger. It's sync drama, written in 1956. And this is a drama in which there is this man who's a communist, or who thinks he's a communist, and who's lashing out at everybody because things are not working. And he has a really ugly, unequal, sexist relationship with his wife. And suddenly in the middle of this narrative, there is death, the wife loses the baby, and so on and so forth. In the middle of this kitchen sink drama, there is this narrative where John Osborne is a character, Jimmy Potter is in the market. And he meets somebody who's a seller of sweets in the market. And this chap has come there to do some trade. And the narrative tells us that this man's name is Kapoor. And that he's also an untouchable. And the first time I read this play, I was looking at the feminist angle. I was looking at, what is the space that's being available to a woman. And it was much later that it just struck me that, Kapoor is really, the whole space of Bollywood. These are our privileged, very, very in-our-face public figures. So anybody who's writing is also constantly going to slip up and not communicate and make a few flaws. But so what does one say? Does one say that, Osborne had no right to write about Kapoor or untouchability in India because he knew nothing about it? But he was
trying to talk about one of the other problems that the world was facing. So I think somewhere this whole space of the writer and what he's doing also needs to be looked into. And having said that, I have taught Sukirti Rani's poem, Debt, at Delhi University. I mean, for a couple of years, we were really bold and daring, and this poem was there, and now it's disappeared from the curriculum. Yeah, it's disappeared from the curriculum, but I continue to teach it. It's the first poem that I teach because I teach the other poems in the unit. So I tell my students about, voices that have been silenced. And it is very important for this poem to have been presented in English because I was really wishing when you were reading it out that you would read out the Tamil version also because maybe there are about 2.5 of us in this room who can understand that. Yeah, no, that's okay. It was just a thought inside my head. So I was thinking that you desperately need this, however flawed, however fragile narrative. So to sit back and say that this doesn't work and this gets lost is also very troubling because things are always getting lost in the spaces that we, in the spaces that we are negotiating. And finally, it is only languages that we have with which we can reach out and communicate to each other. And that's all.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to? Yes, Sachin.
I have a very specific question to Professor Zaidi because you translated ghazal into English. Now, the question of form and in English, though there are ghazals in English, it's not a form that has found its space in English. So when you translated, did you look up the other translation of ghazals in English to how to handle the question of form? Because even if it is a Dalit poet, he is undercutting the form itself. So how did you handle this question when the form itself is not established in English? So how does this undercutting of or subversion of the form in Urdu be transplanted into English?
Okay. So as for the Dalit poet, that is Jayant Parmar, whom I have translated, he mostly writes nazms on Dalit themes. He avoids ghazal form. Uh, he has written ghazals, but they are not there. I mean, they are different in approach. So he doesn't bring in his Dalit consciousness, so to say. But if you can see the Dalit consciousness infecting everything else, then yes, it is there. Having said that, how I translate ghazal, because I have translated ghazals of Ghalib, Mir, and so many other poets as well. You see, there are several challenges in translating ghazal form. Not just the rhyme and rhythm, but several other things. For example, ghazal works on this, suspense schema where the first line throws suspense and next line resolves the suspense. Now, the suspense resolution, structure that ghazal has, the schema that ghazal has, it doesn't work in English. So most of the time, the poets or the translators end up flattening. And ghazal it works through suggestions like all poetry does, but ghazal is the finest form in that sense. So यूं ही गर रोता रहा गालिब तो ए अहले जहां देखना इन बस्तियों को तुम के वीरा हो गई. Now the first line has no direct connection with the second line, right? यूं ही गर रोता रहा गालिब तो ए अहले जहां. Now if you keep crying, then the world will be drowned. Whether your tears will lead to this drowning or veera, not even drowning. He says veera ho gayi, they will become desolate. So what will be the reason of desolation is not directly linked. So ghazal works through this suspense resolution schema, which is very difficult. And that is where most translators have accepted defeat. But then do you stop translating? You don't. Like Agha Shahid Ali says, you still carry on. So he translates 2 line into 5 line, you may disagree, agree or whatever. But the joy of translation is that, you experiment. You try different ways of, saying as much as possible or trying to capture as much as possible. And that is where I think, Poet Lover and Bird Watcher, that Ezekiel's poem, you wait for the meaning. Like all poets do, translators also. And translation is creative exercise, as Benjamin says. So it is a creative exercise, as much a creative exercise as poetry is or creative writing is, because the translator is also trying to grapple grapple with not just given meaning, but all hidden meanings, all suggestions, all ambiguities, and then whatever the translator himself or herself is bringing to the text. So yes, it's a multi-pronged negotiation and conversation and waiting for the meaning, right? So no translator can be satisfied. Every translator waits. You ask a translator to translate the same thing after a few months or years, he will try to do it differently. Thank you.
I'm afraid we'll have to end the session here despite. Sir. Okay, no. So,
Just,
yeah.
just a small thing. Why do you think Osborne was wrong or flawed? Perhaps he wanted you to look back in anger.
Uh, can I call this session to a close now, formally? It's been absolutely wonderful having all our panelists and all our guests here in what turned out to be a brilliant Sunday morning, intellectually stimulating discussion, starting from the hard, economics of publishing translations, on to the difficult experiences of translating across genres, particularly Dalit poetry. And we heard also from different languages and also personal experiences. We hope to continue this discussion in a different session. After coffee, please reassemble by 12. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here.